We're delighted to have Lex Runciman here tonight. You can see that this is going to be a little bit different. So those of us that are going to go back and forth here want to make sure we don't trip on the cords. Lex was born and raised in Portland and has lived most of his life in the Willamette Valley. His latest book is Starting From Anywhere, which has just come out in 2009, and it's his fourth collection, poetry, following Luck in 1981, The Admirations, 1989, which won the Oregon Book Award that year, and Out of Town, 2004. He holds graduate degrees from the writing programs at the University of Montana and also the University of Utah. He's co-editor of two anthologies, Where We Are, the Montana Poets Anthology, and Northwest Variety, personal essays by 14 regional writers. His own work has appeared in numerous anthologies, including from Here We Speak, Portland Lights, and O Poetry, Oposia. He was adopted at birth, and he's going to talk a little bit about that tonight. He and his wife have been married 38 years and are the parents of two growing daughters. He taught at Oregon State University for 11 years before joining the faculty in 1992 at Linfield College, where he received the Edith Green Award in Teaching in 1997. The Milwaukie Poetry Series is delighted to have Lex Runciman here as our poet in October, and so would you join me in welcoming him?
I'm going to watch him negotiate this here. Welcome, everybody, and thank you. Thank you for being here. I want to thank Tom Hogan for doing what he does here. There's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff, and nobody sees it. So thanks, Tom, for what you do in terms of this series. And the city of Milwaukie and the library and all the people who really deserve thanks. I want to also thank Jesse Lindini, who is the editor at Salmon Poetry in Knockhaven, Cliffs of Moher, Ireland. That's the County Clare, Ireland. That's the full mailing address. There are no numbers in it. I'm thrilled by that fact that there's a mailing address with no numbers. And I want to thank Siobhan Hudson, also at Salmon Poetry, because she designed the book. And I should thank that woman sitting over there, who probably doesn't like me pointing her out, but okay. What I want to try and do tonight is explain a little bit about how a poetry book goes together, and at least how this one went together. In that sense, I suppose I'm just going to try and be an advocate for it. I'm not going to be the writer tonight. I mean, because the writer's at home writing another poem. I'm just going to be the guy who sort of knows him and has, some knowledge of what the hell he was trying to do. As you can see, I'm going to be going back and forth with slides. So we'll see if this works. Okay. The book is titled Starting From Anywhere, and that phrase comes from Little Gidding, which is a poem by T.S. Eliot. Little Gidding is there. That's Little Gidding. It's a little tiny church about an hour north of Cambridge in Huntingdonshire, and it was an important place for Eliot to go for reasons that Eliot biographers and critics have continued to argue about and discuss. But I was there, and so that's what it looks like. There's a poem in Starting From Anywhere that actually uses that, the phrase, taking any route, starting from anywhere. But it's going to take me too long to explain it to you, so I'm not going to. But I just wanted to show you, that's Little Gidding, in case you've ever wondered, what the heck. Little Gidding is from the four quartets, and each is named for a particular place. And this is the last one. Okay. But what I really want to do, so let me see if I've got this right. Yes, that's excellent. What I really want to do is read the first poem in this book, because that's where it starts. It's called In My Alternate Life. And I suspect everybody in this room has entertained the fantasy. You might not have said those words to yourself, in my alternate life, but you've entertained the fantasy of wishing you could be somewhere else at some other time, perhaps waiting for a particularly onerous appointment and thinking, oh, yeah, I'd really like to be out under a tree somewhere or wherever your alternate place would be. So I think that's a fairly frequent strategy that we use. For me, the term carries a little bit more of an impact because, as Tom said, I was adopted at birth, and I've known that for as long as I've known anything. I've known that, and so I've always had the sense that, you know, I could have ended up being adopted by other people, and my life would have been very different. And so I think I've always had this notion in my head of an alternate life. So this poem mentions a Mark Rothko painting called Untitled 1949, which I'm going to show you here in a minute. A painting by Edward Hopper called Nighthawks. It mentions a town in South Wales called Abergavenny, which I have been to, but I just love saying the word, Abergavenny. It's a great word. It's a piazza in Florence that's mentioned, Santa Croce, and Dante is mentioned. There's a statue of Dante in Santa Croce in that big piazza. He looks very stern. I'll show you in a minute. And every now and then, pigeons land on his head and do unfortunate things. So, in my alternate life. In my alternate life, I visit Untitled 1949 every Sunday afternoon. And sometimes it hangs in a kitchen, and sometimes in a tea room in Abergavenny in Wales. In my alternate life, I'm Chinese or Brazilian. I'm walking a beach scattered with slate, it being Cornwall, hills, hedgerows, stoats, and a prairie of flowers, and my mother sleeps in a hammock, and my father sketches her into a book. I order at the lunch counter that was Nighthawks the night before. I sit on the stool opposite the coffee urn. My old back feels sturdy as it did when I was 8. Sun likes the ochre wall like terracotta jazz. Nobody bothers me. The cup never drained. How have I forgotten the name of this piazza, Florence, the one with Dante swirling his stone cloak? Walk 3 blocks anyway, and I'll be lost. Sometimes swans, sometimes vultures. Air sings oxygen like after lightning. Boredom slides like a dime under a cushion. It perches like a pigeon on my head. And if I want to talk with someone, there he is. Young or old, American or dead or not, there she is. Stars anytime. Imagination scares me less. People are tolerant, and the world is just. Good. That's a nice alternate one. There's the Mark Rothko painting, Untitled 1949. It's not great color reproduction. The painting is very large. In fact, your first task is trying to figure out where to stand when you want to go see it. It's in the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. I have a poster of it in my office at school. And it's a big poster, but it certainly doesn't do justice to, nor does that. But you get some idea. You've seen Rothko paintings, I suspect. There's Nighthawks. So I figure I'm sitting sort of here. You know, I'm opposite the coffee urns. There's Dante in Santa Croce. He looks a little stern. He has good reason. The Florentines kicked him out. He was born and raised in Florence. Florentines kicked him out for political reasons, and then he got kind of a bee in his bonnet and decided he was never going to go back, and didn't. and he died in Ravenna. And and his tomb is in Ravenna. But if you walk in the church outside this piazza, there's a tomb that says it's Dante's. It's empty. They're just hopeful. He might come back. There he is. He looks a little stern. Yeah. Well, you know, he's in his hometown and they kicked him out and pigeons landed on his head. So life's not fair. Okay. The second poem in this is, in fact, okay, I'll just do this. The second poem in this is called Birds. And it's based in part on that structure, which is Down House. That is the home of Charles Darwin. It's now owned by the National Trust or the Darwin Trust or English Heritage. It's owned by somebody like that. I'm not sure exactly who. I can't recall now. And if you go up to we would call it the second floor, this floor. They call it the first floor because that's the ground floor and that's the first floor. But we call it the second floor. It gets very confusing if you're over there and you ask for directions and they tell you it's on the first floor. You have to think about that. Okay, which floor do they mean? Because that's the second floor. Anyway, there's a long hall that sort of bisects that structure upstairs. And in the middle of that hall is a quite large display case made out of actual glass, not plexiglass, actual glass. And it has arranged in it birds in sort of bare branches, stuffed birds, finches, and underneath stuffed iguanas. And this is this long and about that high. So it's big. And it has the look of something that was there in Darwin's lifetime. I don't know for a fact that it was, but it certainly looks like it could have been. And this poem, I'm presuming, it in fact was. There's going to be a list of names in here. These are the names of Charles Darwin's children, at least some of them. And his wife's name was Emma. Birds. If you go to Down House, the leather boots under the bench by the back door could not belong to Charles Darwin. But the birds, beaks hard, feathers faded, the birds in the glass case in the first floor hall, if you were a better ornithologist, you might imagine their time and places, how they were etherized, singly, reverently in a glass jar, then gutted with a small blade, stuffed, and arranged for beauty and for study. Famous above the iguanas, they perch on stick bushes and no longer startle any of Emma's children, lamp in hand, sleepless at 3 a.m. Not William, Eddie, George, Bessie, Francis, Leonard, Horace, or Annie. Annie, who died in 1851 at the age of 10, who asked her father once if they had names. Only finches, he said. No, they should have names. A fair, fresh day, so he took her hand and led her outside for a walk. Darwin, I don't know how much you know about Darwin. He's kind of in vogue at the moment. He was chronically ill much of his life, and there's two schools of speculation, both of which might be true. One, that he had an ulcer, which wasn't pleasant, and the other, the other was that he might in fact have suffered from lactose intolerance, which is a problem if you drink tea with milk in it. And he would go to various places to try and get remedies for his ailments, none of which were clearly diagnosed. And one of the places he went was to a place that was fashionable at the time that offered a water cure, which today sounds macabre. Dousing, you get up in the morning and you're doused for 15 minutes with cold water, and then you sit for another 20 minutes with a wet blanket and sort of shiver and hover. And then finally you get some breakfast, but it's oatmeal and water. And then you get to take a nap, and then you get to take a walk, and then you get to sit in a hot tub for a while, and then you get a cold tub. the assumption being that there was something in this that was going to be beneficial. Oddly enough, it was beneficial because they wouldn't let him have any milk. So he thought, this works. So he was away at one point, and I just want to read you a little bit about this. He was away at one point at one of these facilities taking a water cure, and he wrote Emma a letter. Emma was his wife again. Yesterday, after writing to you, I strolled a little beyond the glade for an hour and a half and enjoyed myself. The fresh yet dark green of the grand Scotch firs, the brown of catkins of old birches with their white stems, and a fringe of distant green from the larches, it all made an excessively pretty view. At last I fell asleep on the grass and woke with a chorus of birds singing around me and squirrels running up the trees and some woodpeckers laughing, and it was as pleasant and rural a scene as ever I saw, and I did not care one penny how any of the birds or beasts had been formed. Annie, who's mentioned in that poem, died of mysterious circumstances. Nobody quite knows why, but that's her picture. That's Annie. She died at the age of 10. And that death had an impact in the Darwin household, as you can guess. Okay.
Was it after she died that he wrote?
Yeah. That he issued it?
Origins of
Yeah. Yes, and writers hate the fact that Darwin's first book, when it came out in an edition of 1,250 copies and sold out that very day.
Wow.
This is a terrible precedent. A terrible precedent. Many of the poems in this book actually take their titles from somebody else's work. A phrase, a sentence. In this case, it's a list of flowers from a poem by Gillian Clarke, who is the National Poet of Wales. And the list of flowers is foxglove, bedstraw, meadowsweet, cow parsley, ragged robin. And those occur in a poem of Gillian Clarke's that is fairly lengthy, but and at least in part describes a walk that she takes, and she sees these flowers. But in her poem, the walk takes 4 lines, and I thought that's not long enough. I mean, we need a longer walk. So this is my effort to extend the walk in Gillian Clarke's poem. Woke to watery sun, and this morning the first we've had day and weather for such a walk over low wet hills, to range and roam where oxen tilled and tired arms scythed 1,000 years, and find in that hour ample for our harvesting purple thimbled foxglove and bedstraw, meadowsweet, cow parsley, ragged robin, their tips ripe not with tears, but a night's own sweet work. They exhale and they wait the arm. The sun ascends and warms as over pasture and by soft hedgerows we loop and arrive at our start, laden and made quiet, sated and happy to trim and to arrange in the water of a wide-mouthed bell of glass, stems and color we had no hand in making, and for itself praise each, and all their bright refusal to be kept. Everyone knows foxglove. You've seen that. That's easy. 2 kinds, yellow, sort of a yellowy green, and the white. Both of those are bedstraw. Meadowsweet. Cow parsley. We have a version of cow parsley around here. That's the English version. Ragged robin. So, I had to look these up. I might as well let you see them. That's sort of fun. Okay. Okay. The next poem in this book is called Self-Portrait. And you can imagine why, in some sense, I'm drawn to the notion of self-portrait, especially being, well, I continue to think my last name is somewhat random. It could have been anybody's last. I could have been any last name. I mean, well, I don't think there's a Runciman in this room except Debbie. So I could have had any of your last names, which is a little bit interesting, to say the least. And so I have been interested in self-portraits. Let me show you one. When this was in 2007, the Portland Art Museum had a show called Rembrandt and the Golden Age, Masterpieces from the Rijksmuseum. And that was the sort of premier painting in that show. And we went and tried to see it, and it was difficult to see it because it was a crowded day. There were many people listening to these things in their, holding these things up to their ears. And they were sort of in a ring around this painting, which made it, you know, you sort of had to elbow in. And it wasn't an easy experience. And in fact, I was way more aware of the other people trying to watch than I was of me trying to register the painting. So that was on one wall. And there's a good reason they wanted to see it. It's a great face. That's Rembrandt, you know, and he did all kinds of self-portraits over the years. But on the wall, not too far away, was this. And it's about the size of this book. That's about how big it was. And nobody was looking at it. And so I thought, okay, I'll go look at that. And I could get up right close to it, and nobody else was jostling me, and nobody was listening to what you're looking at now is, and there's nothing wrong with those things. I like them sometimes myself, but, and so I looked at him, and he looked at me.
Yeah.
Self-portrait. Understanding the transience of time and place and what happens to every fleshly body. He has anticipated this occasion. He sat down one afternoon, took a seat at a table by a window, arranged his paper, and began by mirror to make himself. Forehead creased, wide-set eyes, broad nose, mustache, cleft chin, jowly, in a frock coat, a hat wider, taller than a bowler, window lace over his right shoulder, a gentle breeze fluttering with his name inscribed, Rembrandt, 1648. All else dense by lines, light is the untouched. Glass and sky, a sheaf of drawings in a stack, a loose cuff, his right thumb and fingers poised as he holds the stylus. Your looking and his collide. His face makes plain that now, having asked his largest question, he will wait for as long as you think, as long as you choose. And what you answer, he will draw. Okay, so that's how Starting from Anywhere begins. It goes all over the place. I mean, it starts, dun, 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 it just kind of goes all over the place, which is sort of fun, you know, but, all right. The middle section of the book, which is where I want to go now, begins to talk more specifically, and in its dead center in this book, there's a prose essay, which I'll get to in a minute, that talks quite directly about parents and children and that kind of stuff. But first, a poem based on this image. This is My Parents by David Hockney. It's in the Tate Britain. I had seen it in a magazine somewhere and thought, and we were lucky enough to take students over to the UK from time to time, pretty much all of this decade. And so I thought, well, the next time I take students over to London, I'm going to go to the Tate, and I'm going to see that. And I got to the Tate and went in and figured out where I should go to find it, and I went up, and on the wall was one of these little cards, no painting, a little card that says something. I can't even remember what it said, but it was on loan, it was being cleaned, it was something. It wasn't there. So I bought the postcard in the shop, you know, and then sort of paid some attention to it, and then lost the postcard and thought, well, I'm going to write about it anyway, even though I've lost the postcard. And eventually I figured out, oh yeah, dummy, you can look it up on the web and you can go see it, you know. But for a while I didn't. So this is mostly right. It's pretty close. Postcard from the Tate, My Parents, by David Hockney. A table between them, they sit on slat chairs. Mother's hands hold each other in her lap. Wearing a high-necked, long-sleeved dress, blue with brown shoes, slippers or loafers. She gazes from that deep repose lack of conversation makes. She's bored, but used to waiting. She wants to be supportive. Half blind, too proud for glasses, father hunches and peers at his paper. The heels of his black Oxfords lift off the ground. He's that tense. He reads with the concentration Churchill brought to war, because he hates just sitting while someone paints or takes a picture. He hates tulips on the table, the vase, all display. He has agreed to do this only because his son's success is discussed now in the Times. The mystery, like God, is David Hockney. Everything in the square summoned by him, arranged and made persistent by his art. Yet these are also merely his parents, who long ago rose from those folding chairs. Never having met them, never having seen the painting, only its postcard. How is it possible then, this genuine affection? Okay. That's the last of those for a few minutes. Hockney's father died a year after that painting was finished. And the poem that I want to read to you now is about, it takes its cue in some sense from my mother's death, which was many years ago now, several years ago, over a decade. It takes its title from a Marjorie Sander story. Marjorie Sander is a wonderful short story writer teaching in Corvallis. And this is one of the phrases that just popped out. I mean, if you start reading this way, if you start reading looking for titles, you will find them all over the place. This is, the truth is never loud. That's Marjorie Sander's phrase. The truth is never loud. The noise became hearable only after her death, which was sudden. No one played the radio. No one hummed. When we emptied the house, rooms echoed, and ghosts with their cigarettes and freshened cocktails sat down at card tables. The women wore rouge and pearls, the men wingtips and diamond tack ties. Someone shuffled, others sipped vodka martinis or early times mist. They chatted about work, children, husbands, wives, who crashed a car, was pulled over drunk, fell from a roof, or cheated, or heard from the docks bad news. They picked up their cards, the room quiet as they sorted faces, aces, and numbers into suits and totaled the count to answer or bid, these being, as they understood them, peaceful hours. Rain outside, late Friday into Saturday, drinks freshened, and time yet, no hurry. My adoptive father died about 5 years ago. He had a blood infection and they just couldn't stop it. He graduated high school in the early 30s, which would have been a great time to graduate high school, if you think about it. It was in the depths of the Depression. But one of his earliest jobs was working for an export company that would speculate, essentially, on grain crops and set a price and hope that they'd set a good price and sell futures, essentially. Sell so many bushels at such and such a price. In order to be able to do that, they had to employ people who would literally travel the Pacific Northwest looking at wheat fields and phoning back reports. This is a good crop here, it's a not so good crop here, it's a really great crop here, and so on. So we spent a lot of time looking at wheat fields and talking with farmers and trying to get a sense of how the crop was going to be. And that explains the last image in this poem. Lear in bed. My father was Lear. Once he slept in a basket of laundry and woke when she scolded him his mudded shoes. Once in an estuary he swam with seals, their black coats. Now only cold arrives, the window iced thick as his wrist. He is turned and washed as an infant, hands on the covers arranged. He is not privy to helplessness that would be insult if he knew it. His brother, who died pruning a tree, has arrived still gloved, still sweaty from that trouble. When the fog clears, he will pace the rolling ground of a wheat field, estimating a price at bushels per acre. Sun in his eyes. This would be a good place to stop. Okay, so not too long ago, a couple, 2 years, 3 years ago now maybe, Oregon Humanities, which is a publication of the Oregon Humanities Council, issued a call for writers who wanted to write on the notion of secrets, the subject of secrets. And I read that and I thought, I've got something to say about secrets. As somebody who has lived in a closed adoption, in the situation of a closed adoption all my life. And so I worked on an essay which they graciously published, and I've revised it some for this book, but I'm just going to read a little bit of it, but this is prose. I'm going to read 3 paragraphs, 1 and then 2 that are connected. What I know of my past starts with what my parents told me. I was born in St. Vincent's Hospital in Portland in the early 1950s, and very soon thereafter adopted. My adoptive mother had been stricken with cancer. The verb is accurate. She was stricken. Her treatment had made it impossible for her to conceive children, so she and my father had sought to adopt. As a child, I must have had many questions that I voiced from time to time, but like all children, I learned to read my parents' moods and realized that this was both a deeply important and profoundly painful subject. Many years later, my wife asked my adoptive mother what she knew about my birth family, but there wasn't much to relate. In those days, the entire adoption process depended on secrecy. Closed adoptions like mine rest on the living daily embrace of fiction, an embrace that parents and children must learn to share. From the parent's view, one's children are not really one's children, yet they are. And the adopted child knows that one's parents are not really one's parents, yet they are. For me, this openness to fiction, to adoption as a larger idea, has led to a sort of openness toward the world. Anyone of the right age could function as mother or father figure, as sibling or a distant cousin. A long-running, thoroughly stale joke in our house claims my real parents were Marilyn and Elvis. I want to hold to that, actually, although I can somehow didn't inherit what I should have. Anyhow, this embracing of fiction, the fiction of adoption, is similar to other beliefs affirmed in our daily lives. We believe in green pieces of paper in our wallets. As paper, it carries almost no intrinsic value, yet a $20 bill gets me into a movie I want to see and yields some other paper and coins as well. Or it gives me something I'm happy to eat. We believe in property lines, even if we cannot always see them. We believe, sometimes now less fully, in our ability to make astonishing promises like, until death do us part. Affirming such fictions brings an order we seek, and it creates value in the many understandings of that word. Okay. So, back to poems. The one I want to read next, and it follows the prose piece, is called In the Blessed Absence of Television. That's a fun phrase to put at the top of the page. What are you going to say underneath that? This is a poem that's in 3 sort of irregular stanzas, but I mention that because if you listen, you can almost track when they start and stop. For me, each one addresses some kind of mystery, or something that I think of as mysterious. The first one is simply memory. If I asked you all to shut your eyes and imagine a room you slept in as a child, you could do it. I don't know how you can do that. I guess I understand in some weird evolutionary way why it's helpful to have that ability, but it still strikes me as mysterious. The second one is generation. Why is there stuff? Why does stuff keep getting made? Birds, animals, people, all of it. And the last one is really the mystery of my own birth parents. So those 3 stanzas. In the Blessed Absence of Television is a phrase from a John Burnside memoir, which is called A Lie About My Father, which is sort of interesting and weird. I don't know how to figure that out, connection. He's a Scot. John Burnside is a Scot. My father was a Scot. The Runciman was the guy who took care of the horses. In the Blessed Absence of Television. If you knew where in the vacant lot, past the prunings, leaves, bushes hauled there to root or rot, where weeds in their exuberance rose, if you dug there, you found pink worms, noodly, segmented live things expanding and contracting, eager for the dark. That place holds a house now. I don't know whose. The creek goes in a concrete pipe, but I remember it otherwise, as present as outside and tonight. If last spring we had children in this house, they would have seen the tenacity of robins on a nest, an illustration of whatever they would make of it. 3 eggs, 3 robins fledged, all that slow construction and raucous hunger. Then a second try, and none to hatch. They would have asked us to fix the injustice or explain the rules. About the people who at my birth gave me up, I construct idle stories, any of them in the making insufficient. I believe they are now both dead. What is there to blame them for? They greet me, the best of them, in my daughters. As for secrets, some we keep, some keep us. One of the places that we were lucky enough to visit was Tintern Abbey, which is the next slide I'll show you here in a second. And I realized at some point when I was there that I was doing something that my parents never had the chance to do. They didn't go to college. I went to college. And when they said goodbye, have a good first semester or whatever, I was exuberant. They seemed a little less so. which as I watched this happen at Linfield over the years, I sort of understand. But what they did, as in retrospect, and maybe they knew it better than I did at the time, but what they did was sort of say goodbye to me in some sense. I was going into a world I didn't know. It was going to change me in ways that they couldn't anticipate. And it's accurate because in some sense I've never left. I'm still reading the poems that were taught to me in college. I'm still going to some of the places that they name and so on. I'm still teaching some of those same poems. I kind of thought about that when I was at Tintern Abbey. Tintern Abbey is also famous for a number of reasons. Turner painted it. It was a famous ruin in Wordsworth's time. Wordsworth took a walking tour through there with his sister Dorothy, and they were separated as young children. Their parents died one after the other pretty quickly, and they didn't have any place. Obviously they didn't have any parents anymore. So you have to go live with somebody. So the family got sort of parceled out, and they were not in close communication, although they wished to be. They missed each other dearly. They were each other's best friends, as 7, 8, 9-year-olds, and then they got split up. But eventually they did get back together as adults, and they took this walking trip. And one of the places that they walked through was the Wye Valley it's in Wales. It's in the far east, east side of Wales. And Wordsworth wrote his great poem that's titled mostly just titled in books as Tintern Abbey, although if you read the whole thing, it's quite a long sentence. And it tells you that really he wrote the poem a few miles above Tintern Abbey as he was walking along. It's a poem that celebrates natural landscapes and what nature can still bring us, I think. Quote, "That blessed mood in which the burden of the mystery, in which the heavy and the weary weight of all this unintelligible world is lightened. That serene and blessed mood in which the affections gently lead us on until the breath of this corporeal frame and even the motion of our human blood almost suspended, we are laid asleep in body and become a living soul, while with an eye made quiet by the power of harmony and the deep power of joy, we see into the life of things." That's Wordsworth. That's not me. I would like it to be. That's Wordsworth. Okay. Tintern Abbey, Wales. I'll show you in a minute. "Where ruins trouble time and common day, a halt wind now whispers, now roars upriver, cold over the shoulders of hawthorns, hills unleafed, all branches haze and confusion. Here windows are windows, yet unglassed, and roof is sky, where doves sail and calm to choir, nave, and aisle, smooth tombs in a floor of grass. The irreligious wondered here or gazed, the unconfessed trembled, and prayers said or unsaid, chanted, sung, or cursed were once numerous as ours." H-O-U-R-S. Although you can hear it both ways, obviously. "Walls unroofed, east lights yet open to sun, lobed columns, a cloister, a warming room. Quiet deepens and hallows day, confirms around us and in us, answer and touch, laughter, hate, absence, and presence together. May the good dead love us who know this place." There it is. I can tell you a little bit about it. It was built from 1269 to 1301. That's how long it took to build it. It was dissolved by Henry VIII in 1536. It was turned over to one of his supporters, who was one of his first acts reportedly was to pull down the roof because it was made out of lead, and lead was worth something. So it was unroofed rather quickly. It was probably stone floored at some point, but, well, there are an awful lot of stone walls and stone houses in the vicinity, and you might guess where some of those stones came from. And you can see that there are still a few tombs over here, but that's a rare day when the sun's out, seems like. Okay. So the middle section of this book ends with this poem. It's a W.S. Merwin, comes from a W.S. Merwin poem. The title is "My Father is Telling Me the Story." Now, I've heard phrases like that all my life. My mother told me this, my father told me that, and half the time I've had this little, oh, because I think, which father? Which mother? And then I realize, no, they don't have two. I do. But they don't. So there's always, I mean, it's not been problematic in any particular way, but it's just been there. You know. My father is telling me the story. You have never known the pitch or timbre of your father's voice, nor the force or shape of his hands, nor the way his brow furrowed as he squinted at small print. You have not known what he turned away from closing the door, except you are that person. You have not known what he made of night sky, or the way sun at dawn in November glistens. You have not known his shoes or watches or ties, his gait or religion or lack of it, nor his sisters nor his brothers, and of your mother you lack all the same. You look in the mirror and do not think of this now. You hear through the window a bird you recognize but cannot name. You look in the mirror, but not for who is there. So, okay, so that's the middle section. This last one is just kind of, well, it goes all over the place, which is fun. This is called Pacific or Not. It's my title. I think of this as celebration. Pacific or not, the skies of my heart are colored by the sea. Color of doves, they bunch like fleece. They call to their upper reaches muslin and linen. They rain. Blackened, they go some mornings all the hues to blue. The landscape of my heart breathes trees, and under them mosses, creeks, trillium. The salt uplifts and snow make a year of advances and of retreats. Thus the waters of the landscape of my heart ice the hands that cup them, and for the love of trout feed caddis and mayflies, and offer for maniacal salmon, gravel, cascades, and pools. Leaves drift, wet pebbles shine, breeze through shade is balm. The air of my heart is fog, is dew and clear, wood smoke, salt and wet. Its notes fill my ears. It colors fire, blooms roses and apples, and warms the slumped naps of summer afternoons. Muddy roiling, a river arriving, a river going away, bridges make the cities of my heart. Walking over, we pause, some of us, we lean on our arms and look. And as for the people of my heart, of only a few do I know their names, and they know who they are. Insomnia, BBC World Service. I'm not the only one. Because I could not sleep, I listened. A woman's undulant voice spoke of her rape. 3 years past, a tactic of war. The child of that afternoon asleep in her arms until its crying interrupts the translator's English. What happened to your husband? They made him watch, then killed him. Mark Twain said, "The world owes you nothing. It was here first." But he had not heard this woman singing to her waking boy. That's the Wolf Creek Inn, Southern Oregon, down towards Grants Pass. That's sort of the original structure. There's a add-on in the back. And if you're going to walk in the front door, that's what it looks like. At the Wolf Creek Inn. The effort always to be here. A veranda, second floor at the Wolf Creek Inn, circa 1883. Summer green apples plumping in a canopy opposite a thirsty birch. Mary Pickford, Jack London, Clark Gable, Orson Welles, all slept here. 4 miles upriver, all that remains of Golden drifts and ghosts in a dream neither church nor placer minds confirmed. From this valley's sides, leafy red trunk madrone loop and angle stoic for rain, easy and deep in their non-advocacy. Nothing I see calls me to cut it down, dynamite it or sluice it through screens. Dark rises. The day's last slow light goes an ashy rose. A breeze over trout asleep in Coyote Canyon Creek. Hawks never ask to whom the earth belongs. Hawks never ask to whom the earth belongs. I'm going to say it, I should say it right. This is the suite. There, those two windows. That's where Clark and Orson and Mary would have slept. Down here in a little tiny room with a little tiny bed built right up against the wall is where Jack London slept because that's all he could afford. It's worth going to see it if you want. Getting close here. That's a stone circle in the north of England. It's in an area called the Lake District. Its name is Castlerig, and that's the broadside that you've got in front of you. That's the poem I want to read now. As you can see, it's a sheep pasture. And there's been a lot of walking through here. I mean, yeah, they've been pasturing the sheep in there. They don't mow it. They just let the sheep go and eat it. If you go to Stonehenge, which is the most famous stone circle in England, it's sort of politely roped off, and there's a path that you're supposed to walk. And you're not really supposed to walk among the stones at all, unless it's the solstice or unless there's some special occasion that says that then they open things up. And I think partly it's because they have so many visitors. I've seen it in the off season. I would not want to see Stonehenge in July or August. I think that would be an awful lot of people walking around listening to those things and eating popcorn and taking each other's pictures, and all of that's understandable in its way. But there's something deeply mysterious about these circles, it seems to me. This one, as I said, is in the north. It's just outside of a town called Keswick. It's spelled K-E-S-W-I-C-K, but they don't pronounce the W, so it's Keswick. It's less than 20 miles from where Wordsworth lived. Keats certainly visited it. And it's been around for roughly 5,000 years, so they think. It's a little bit difficult to date stones. There's no organic matter there. So what they have to do is date the dirt under the stone. At Castlerig, Cumbria. 38 Neolithic stones circle what they always have. You, if you're inside them, grass at your feet, sky if you look up. The song they sing hasn't varied with Thursday or next week, Caesar or Christ, Muhammad, peace be upon him, Siddhartha, Shakespeare, Sappho, or Mickey Mouse. Keats walked here, called it in his journal the Druid Temple. Coleridge knew it. Wordsworth, Dorothy, me, or you, the same. What one should do here isn't clear. The planet warms, sheep bleat. You try to think of time. It goes the same as wind, grass, rock, sky. Walking the circle, touching each stone. I want their certainty. I want to say what they say so I can hear it. There's another one, a view of it looking. Okay. I think that's the last of those. Turn that off. I've got two more, and we'll call it good. This poem takes its title from a Tim O'Brien novel called The Lake of the Woods. Tim O'Brien is a Vietnam writer, writes often about Vietnam. He served there. He's haunted by his service there. In The Lake of the Woods is a murder mystery, but it takes as for its main character a man who served in Vietnam, doctored his own records later on about where he might have been on such and such a day at such and such a week and such a time, and then went into politics when he came back from Vietnam. His service record, nevertheless, gets discovered, and his sort of crude efforts at doctoring it get discovered, and the press gets hold of the fact that he was at a place very much like My Lai in Vietnam. And if you don't know your Vietnam history, that was a place of fairly profound disorder, murder by American troops. So anyway, as a result of that, he loses the election badly. And he and his wife go to the Lake of the Woods was it Michigan? Am I right? Minnesota? Anybody know? Which one? Northern Minnesota, thank you. And his wife comes up missing 2 days after they get there. And nobody knows, and he can't remember what happened. So he says. So it's a murder mystery. And the person who tells the story is an investigator who's trying to figure out what happened. And he eventually realizes he's never going to find out what happened. And he says this at one point towards the end of the novel. If ending is air, then why not happiness? So I've stolen the title. If ending is air. So you have to forget everything I told you about the novel. If ending is air, then why not happiness? Starlings, when they light on the roof, sound like water. Evening, after a hot June day, noon higher than the record, then later, wind off the planet's largest sea. The book ends. It rests on the table, a planet, as Wallace Stevens said. Fans hum. I think of places on the other side of the earth, smells or sounds or touch I remember, faces and names. The room down the hall, the one I slept in, or nights I rested on ground by a noisy creek with snowmelt. By a creek noisy with snowmelt, and let it lull me after I stopped staring at stars. June glide is slow, delicious time. Everything is choice, and nothing is. God is what or who knows the difference. Okay, last one. And this takes its title from a biography by Andrew Motion of an English poet named Philip Larkin. Larkin was a librarian. He was something of a misanthrope in a number of ways. But he has been recently proclaimed via public solicitation as one of the most beloved poets in Britain. And the speculation is that it's for this poem, which I will read you in a slightly adulterated version. When I say messed, you must think of a word that begins with F. Okay? Philip Larkin, this be the verse. They mess you up, your mom and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. They fill you with the faults they had, add some extra just for you. But they were messed up in their turn by fools in old-style hats and coats, who half the time were soppy stern and half at one another's throats. Man hands on misery to man. It deepens like a coastal shelf. Get out as early as you can and don't have any kids yourself. So Andrew Motion writes a biography of this man, and in that biography is this phrase. It's actually a sentence. Immediately after Christmas, the mood lightened in Manor Road. And I thought, okay, I'm going to run with that. Yeah. Immediately after Christmas, the mood lightened in Manor Road. Aunt Lillian's hives subsided. And the dogs resolved with a packet of beef gristle, expelled as we listened to the symphony. Blocked for a fortnight by snow, the glazier's van arrived at last to replace the makeshift cashmere window plug required after the crow flew through lead came and glass and fell dead on an open page of the Oxford English Dictionary C volume, its black neck broken. After multiple gin fizzes, Mother has arrayed herself in silks and George's Stetson. She dances to Muddy Waters, with Father in his bear costume, complete with growling. Uncle Winslow burnt the tree in a roar, a wonder the chimney survived, and the several second cousins have formed fruitcake into balls they roll now for 10 pins in the hall. Outside, we're delighted how bells peal, and the human voice carries over snow. Walter calls. Edna sends her best regards, as do Maud and Frank. I wept a little this morning thinking of poverty, illness, the numberless orphans. Thank God, no more talk of presents. Winter sunlight, winter dark, they are the best, don't you think? Must go with all our love, or this shall miss the post, though I know there is always something more, something important I have forgot. Okay, thanks everybody. So, do you want to ask questions while Windows shuts down?
Where's the cover from?
I should tell you that, yes.
I don't see it in the book.
It's a bookstore in a town in Wales called Larne, which is where Dylan Thomas lived for his later years. And it's right across the street from Brown's Hotel, which is where he drank. And it's about 4 blocks on foot from his house. So, which is built on a hill, more like a cliff actually, over the River Tay, over the estuary of the River Tay. So it's quite gorgeous, quite beautiful. And it's owned by, it's said in Welsh, and I'm not sure how to say it, but it's the Welsh organization that keeps track of historical places and so on. So that's where it is. Yeah, you bet. Yes.
What's your writing practice?
What's my writing practice?
Yes.
Get as much practice as possible. Yeah. Well, my own writing practice is dictated a lot by the circumstances of my life. I teach at Linfield, which means that my schedule is absolutely dictated at some hours and less clearly dictated in others. my doors open a lot, and I get a lot of visitors. And at least 2-3 times a week, I've got a poem on that computer, waiting in some form or another. And I figured out how to take 15 minutes or 10 minutes and use it and noodle around. There's always 5 or 6 sort of there, kind of, sort of, in progress. And yeah, I just don't stop. It's fun. Yeah.
So you do yours on the computer, you don't do it longhand?
I'll do it longhand if I don't have the computer.
Okay.
Yeah,
How do
but
you know when it's done?
yeah, that's a great question. How do you know when it's done? You know when it's done, I think, when one of 2 things happens, and I wish that the first happened way more frequently than the second. But the first is you write something and you just know, okay, that's it. That's it. I've got it. And you're done. You just, I don't know how to explain it except that you realize very, very quickly, almost in some sense instantaneously, it's it. You got it. That's rare, but sweet.
Right brain, huh?
Might even call it addictive. The other way is sort of a slog, and you read it, and you read it, and you read it, and you read it, and pretty soon you realize, this is just me. And there are lots of writers in this room, and everybody's going to have their own answer to your question, it seems to me. But you read it, and you read it, and you read it, and pretty soon one of 2 things becomes clear to you. Either if you fool with it any further, you'll mess it up. Or you read it one morning and realize you have no impulse to tinker with it. You read it straight through, and you had no impulse to do anything to it at all. It sort of told you, okay, leave me alone. Yeah, it's
The
good.
traveling that you did, Lex, was that, did you already have a collection of poems or an idea of a book, and you went there and
No.
that enriched the writing, or was that part of the process?
No, that was part of the process. I mean, as far as I was concerned, first of all, I had this notion that all those writers that college students read in anthologies with very thin paper, all those people actually were people. They actually breathed and walked the earth and scratched their heads and got the flu and drank too much and slept late and all of the stuff that we do. But I think it's hard to sort of connect with that sometimes. So I wanted to connect with it too. I wanted to go to some of these places. And Linfield offers the chance for students to take travel courses and for faculty to teach them. And so I sort of got in that queue and tried to do some of that. The notion of writing, well, the course was called Creative Writing in Literary Britain, which I then later changed to Literary UK because we were in Wales and we were in Scotland, and there's a difference if you're over there. But I would ask students to carry a notebook and write every day. And I thought, well, you know, good enough for them, good enough for me. Good enough? Oh, Pauline.
Would you read the Whitman poem?
I'll read you the Whitman
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. The Whitman poem is I think of as, there it is, as a kind of bookend, because there's an Emily Dickinson poem in here too. But and I think of Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson as sort of the founding mother and father of American poetry, really. It's not that there weren't earlier writers, some of whom I admire deeply, but I sort of feel like, see, I can do this because I'm adopted. I feel like I can sort of trace my lineage back to those two. Why not? You know.
Marilyn and Elvis.
Exactly, right. Okay, so this is called All is a Procession. The phrase is Whitman's, and it's from I Sing the Body Electric. And one of the phrases in this poem is Balk's account, B-A-L-K-S, Balk's account, which is a 19th century phrase, not really a 20th or 21st century phrase. And I would translate it as something like, cannot be accounted for. cannot be accounted for. Yes. All is a procession. The oaks at my window, the roads and byways of their great bark, sometimes exposed, sometimes by mosses thickened. Moss, green all seasons but August, the green then almost rust. The oaks at my window, columns wide at the ground and thinning higher, splitting, branching, and splitting, rivers draining air into the sea of the ground, and the ground's water rising to ever smaller streams and dissipations, each leaf all that rustles, quiet in the currents of day, noisy in the currents of the dark. My arms cannot circle the oaks out my window. Their age not of grandfathers or mothers, but dozen grandmothers and fathers, who idled under those winter bare scaffolds, and marked their own breath as they looked up at snow, who dozed in June's warm and insect whine, stared at shadow and thought of what next to do, and stood then and walked away. The oaks at my window, balk account. Mistletoe thick in their crowns, balks account, and lichens sleeving their slender arms, flags of ferns aloft in their branched hollows, birds fond of acorns and squirrels fond of acorns, worms inside puffballs like decorations hung, all balk account. All evolution, iris and lens, aqueous humors, heart and bronchial trees, and tympanum, hammer, stirrup, and anvil, the meanders of finger pads, each itself, and jays territorial, and quail, song swallows, the voice that calls, and the voice that answers. By accidents, by causes and endless effects, all evolution has led alike to the oaks out my window. I see them every day, and they balk account, as does my happiness seeing them.
Bravo.